A lie can travel far, but truth always arrives on time. The old saying stayed pressed against Mary's ribs as she stood in the doorway of Celeste Beaumont's Chicago mansion. The air inside felt still, too still. The kind of stillness that comes right before a truth refuses to be ignored. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't even second-guessing. Mary held printed evidence against her chest, the papers trembling, only because Joe was trembling. He stood beside her, pale, unable to hide the shock running through him. His mother, elegant, poised Celeste, looked like a woman who had finally been cornered by the very thing she hoped would never surface. Mary took one step forward. Celeste's eyes darted to the documents in Mary's hands. Her fingers tightened around the pearl necklace at her throat. She looked from her son to Mary, back to the papers, as if each angle made the situation harder to escape. Joe's voice cracked first. "Mom, please say you didn't do this." Celeste didn't answer. Mary didn't wait for her to. Her voice was calm, sharper than anything money could soften. "Your money almost destroyed my marriage, but I heard everything." The words didn't echo. They landed, heavy, final, honest. Celeste took a step back, almost stumbling into her marble counter, her polished confidence thinned like fog disappearing at sunrise. She tried to recover her posture, tried to breathe with dignity, but her eyes betrayed her. Fear, regret, stubborn pride, all tangled together. "Mary," Celeste began, lifting a trembling hand. "There must be some confusion." Mary set the papers on the pristine granite island between them. "No confusion," she said quietly. "Just truth." Joe swallowed hard, stepping closer so he could see the pages again. The bank transfer, the message thread, the signature that matched his mother's handwriting perfectly. His chest tightened. He started placing one hand on the counter, as if he needed something steady to hold on to. "Why?" Joe whispered. "Why would you do something like this?" Celeste finally looked at him, really looked at him. "Because," she said through a shaking breath, "I wanted the life I planned for you. The life you deserved." Mary watched Joe close his eyes. She could almost hear his heart drop to the floor. "This," Mary said softly, tapping the stack of proof with her fingertips, "isn't planning his life. This is interfering with it." Celeste pressed her lips together as if she wanted to argue, but the weight of the evidence left her with no ground to stand on. Her perfectly arranged world, marble floor, crystal chandeliers, curated perfection, felt suddenly small compared to the truth that sat quietly on her kitchen counter. Joe stepped forward, voice cracking. "Mom, you paid someone, paid them to come between us." He turned toward Mary, guilt flooding his expression. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Mary kept her stare on Celeste. "You didn't just pay someone," Mary said. "You hired her. You coached her. You sent messages. You pushed a woman into my life to make me believe my husband didn't want me." Something in Celeste's face flickered. Guilt, maybe, or fear of losing everything she thought she was protecting. Mary took a breath, steady and controlled. "You could have talked to me," she said. "You could have asked who I was. Instead, you tried to replace me." Joe covered his mouth with his hand, overwhelmed. For months he sensed something wrong but couldn't name it. Now the truth was flashing in front of him, bright, undeniable. Mary knew this was the moment viewers would lean in. So she turned to the screen, to the audience, to the people listening. "Bestie, before I continue, like this video and comment truth wins so YouTube pushes this story out." Then Mary refocused on Celeste. "You didn't expect me to hear that phone call," she said. "You didn't expect me to see the messages, but I did, all of it." Celeste wiped the corner of her eye as if she didn't want her mascara to run. "I was trying to protect my son," she whispered. Mary stepped closer, lowering her voice so Joe could hear every word. "Real protection never destroys the person your child loves." For the first time, Celeste had no answer. The truth had pinned her in place, and nothing, not her money, not her status, not her pride, could silence the evidence sitting between them. Joe leaned toward Mary, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have defended you sooner." Mary exhaled deeply, steady but hurt. "This isn't just about me," she told him. "It's about the life we were building, the trust we needed, the home we were trying to create." Her last words drifted between them like a quiet warning, shaping the next chapter of their lives, because nothing about this moment would leave any of them unchanged. Mary stood in Celeste's kitchen, her heart steady, her back straight. But before the next wave of truth could hit the room, the story turned outward, toward the millions of people who would watch this moment and quietly whisper, "I've been there." Because this wasn't just a confrontation. It was a mirror. Mary shifted slightly, her eyes softening as she turned, not at Celeste this time, but toward the audience. "Let me ask you something," she said quietly, her voice layered with exhaustion and strength. "Have you ever loved someone so deeply, only to realize someone close to them didn't want you there?" She let the question breathe. "Have you ever been judged for coming from a different world, a different background, a different skin tone? Have you ever walked into a room and instantly felt like you didn't belong, not because of who you are, but because of who someone expected you to be?" Behind her, Joe lowered himself into a chair, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked like a man facing the truth about the woman who raised him and the woman he chose to love. Mary continued, her tone not angry, but reflective. "Some people smile at you, but their heart is somewhere else. Some people think they know what's best for your partner, even when they barely know anything about you. And sometimes you try to be polite, try to be respectful, but deep down you feel the walls closing in." Joe lifted his head at that. He knew Mary was talking about more than Celeste. She was talking about every relative who sized her up at dinners, every whispered comment about fitting in, every quiet moment when she had to pretend she didn't hear the judgment. Mary stepped closer to Joe and placed her hand on the back of his shoulder. "I know some of you watching this have dealt with interference in your relationships," she said, her voice warm and honest. "Maybe it was a mother-in-law, maybe it was a friend, maybe it was someone who couldn't stand the idea of you being happy because your happiness didn't look like their plan." Celeste looked away. "And maybe," Mary added softly, "you've been in a relationship where love wasn't the problem. It was the people outside the relationship, their opinions, their pressure, their expectations." She wasn't lecturing, she was relating. Her voice dipped slightly, carrying a quiet ache. "I come from a different world than Joe. My community, my culture, my roots, they're part of me, and I was proud to share them. But every time someone looked at me like I wasn't enough, I swallowed it. I brushed it off. I told myself not to take it personal." She pressed a hand to her chest. "But it was personal." Joe covered his eyes with his palm, ashamed that he hadn't seen all of it sooner. Mary addressed the viewers again. "When you love someone, you shouldn't have to compete with the people who claim to love them too. You shouldn't have to erase who you are just to be accepted. You shouldn't have to fight for a place in a marriage you already committed to." Her words landed with a gentle but heavy truth. She took a breath, lifting her chin. "And if you've ever been there, if you've ever cried in a car before, walking into someone else's house, or rehearsed polite lines so they wouldn't judge you, or held back a part of yourself to keep the peace, then you understand exactly what this moment feels like." Joe finally whispered, "Mary, I didn't know you carried all of that." Mary placed her hand over his. "I'm telling this not to hurt you," she said, "but because too many people watching know this story too well." Her gaze swept the room again. Celeste stiff, Joe wounded, the papers sitting between them like a silent witness. Love should feel like partnership, safety, home. But when someone tries to pull that apart, especially someone with power over your spouse, it shakes everything. Then she asked the last question, the one that reached the core of every viewer's memory. "Have you ever felt like you were good enough for the person you loved, but not good enough for the family they came from?" The honesty in her voice was unfiltered, intentional, and raw. "That," she said gently, "is where our story truly begins." Joe stayed hunched forward, his elbows digging into his knees, breathing unevenly as everything he thought he understood about his mother's concerns finally fell apart. But Mary wasn't done, not with Celeste, and not with the truth. She reached into her bag and pulled out one more paper. A single sheet, a message thread printed in clear, undeniable text. She laid it gently beside the rest. Celeste's eyes locked on it, and whatever excuses she planned to use died right there. Mary looked directly at her. "This isn't just you sending warnings," she said softly. "This is you paying someone to pretend Joe didn't want his own wife." Joe's head snapped up. "What?" he whispered. Mary nodded slowly and turned the page toward him so he could see every word. "Tina didn't just insert herself into our lives," Mary said. "She was hired. You paid her to sway things." Her exact words. She admitted it. "You weren't just trying to separate us. You built a plan around it." Celeste's lips parted, but nothing came out. "Because the truth was louder," Mary continued, her tone steady. "You told her exactly what to say, exactly how to approach me, exactly how to plant doubts in my marriage. You tried to make me believe that Joe wanted out, that he had second thoughts, that he regretted choosing me." Joe pressed a hand against his heart as if he needed to hold it in place. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking, You did this?" Celeste's hands trembled around the pearls at her neck. "I didn't think she'd go that far," she whispered. Mary narrowed her eyes, not with anger, but with clarity. "You told her to go that far?" The silence that followed was heavy, so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Mary's voice softened, but her words dug deeper than any shout could. "You paid someone to walk into my life and pretend to be a messenger. You paid her to break my confidence, my trust, my peace. You wanted her to make me believe Joe didn't love me anymore. You wanted me to walk away." Joe inhaled sharply. His mother's actions hit him like a wave he never saw coming. "You tried to destroy my marriage," he whispered. "My actual marriage." Mary touched his arm gently, grounding him. "This is why you felt pulled from both sides," she said. "This is why you felt confused. It wasn't in your head. Someone was making sure cracks formed, just small enough to grow." Joe closed his eyes, the realization crushing. "And I let it happen," he said, voice hollow. "I should have seen the signs. I should have listened to you." Mary cupped his cheek with one hand, forcing his eyes to open, not to shame him, but to remind him she wasn't the enemy. "You didn't know," she whispered. "You trusted your mother. Nobody blames you for that." Celeste blinked, stunned that Mary could show compassion in a moment so painful. Mary stepped closer to the counter, pointing to the final message on the sheet. "It says right here," she continued, "that Tina would create doubts so deep the marriage won't survive. And you approved the payment." Celeste's voice cracked. "I was trying to save my son from a life that didn't match our world." Mary's jaw tightened. "You weren't saving him," she said. "You were controlling him, and hurting me in the process." Joe let the words sink in, each one a piece of truth he could no longer avoid. He stood, slowly. His gaze moved between his mother and his wife. Then he looked at Mary, eyes full of regret. "I didn't know she paid someone," he said, almost choking on the words. "But I should have protected you. I should have stood up sooner. I am so sorry." Mary breathed in, steady and soft. "I'm hurt," she admitted, "but I'm here. Because I know who you are. And I know why your mother did this doesn't match the son she raised." Celeste's shoulders sagged, her confidence slipping completely. For the first time, the truth wasn't just sitting on the counter, it was sitting in all their laps. Every secret, every choice, every wound, and every consequence that was coming next. Mary lifted her chin as her next words prepared the audience for the journey ahead. "This isn't the whole story, not even close. What happened before this moment, and what happened after, is something every family should hear." Mary took one step back from the counter, giving Joe a chance to breathe, giving Celeste space to face her own choices, and giving the audience a moment to absorb everything they just witnessed. Because this wasn't just drama, it was the turning point of 3 different lives. Mary lifted her eyes again, not toward Celeste now, and not toward Joe, but toward the viewers sitting behind their screens. Her voice grew calm, thoughtful, inviting. "Now, here's the real question," she said gently. How did things get this far? How did a marriage built on trust get pushed to the edge by someone who claimed to love him the most? She continued, taking her time so her words reached exactly where they needed to land. How does a woman uncover a plan designed to break her home? How does a husband choose between the mother who raised him and the woman who stood by his side? And how does a family, once split by interference, ever find a way back to each other? Her hand drifted over the papers one last time. This moment didn't happen out of nowhere. It started long before we reached this kitchen, before the phone call I overheard, before the messages were printed, before the doubts were planted. There were signs, small ones, that grew into something neither of us expected. Joe shifted his weight, quietly listening, his face soft with regret. Mary glanced toward him and added, "And what happened after this moment? Well, that changed everything." She let that linger. Not rushed, not forced, just honest. Then she spoke to the audience with a warm and steady sincerity. "If you stay with me, I'll show you how truth came to light. I'll show you how love gets challenged, how trust gets shaken, and how forgiveness can rebuild what money tried to tear apart." The room felt heavier, but not hopeless. You're going to see how a wealthy mother reached a breaking point, how her son's heart was caught between two worlds, and how his wife, me, decided that silence wasn't going to save anyone. She stepped forward, hands gently clasped. You're about to watch a family fall apart and learn how we found our way back, not through money, not through pressure, but through lessons that every one of us needs at some point in life. Then Mary smiled, a soft, steady smile that carried both pain and promise. "So if you're ready to hear the whole truth, stay with me until the end. I promise it'll be worth it." She turned one last time to the viewers. Subscribe, besties, so you never miss powerful stories like this. And with that, the hook closed. Not with shouting, not with chaos, but with the quiet certainty that the story wasn't just beginning. It was about to open every door behind the moment they all just witnessed. There were certain streets in Atlanta that carried Mary's childhood like a familiar song. The aroma of grilled corn drifting from backyard cookouts, gospel choirs practicing on Saturday mornings, kids racing past porches with mismatched shoes. It was a world filled with color, warmth, and history that shaped every inch of her identity. Mary grew up in a small, cozy house in southwest Atlanta where family didn't end at blood. Her father, Kwame, taught history at the local high school, and her aunt Tamika led the church choir. Every weekend brought a crowd, cousins, neighbors, church members, eating, laughing, arguing softly, but always gathering again like nothing ever broke them. She was raised in an environment where people shared what they had, even when it wasn't much. Her father often came home with stories about students who had no books but big dreams, and Mary listened closely. She grew up believing that people deserved to be seen, respected, understood. She carried those values into everything she touched. Her home was also a learning space. Kwame would sit by the kitchen table marking papers, pausing every few minutes to explain pieces of Black history that didn't always make it into textbooks. Mary absorbed everything: the strength of the women who built the community, the struggles of earlier generations, the victories no one wrote about. She learned early how stories could shape people. By the time she reached high school, she had already begun writing small articles for the community newsletter, simple pieces, highlighting small businesses, honoring teachers who stayed, past hours, capturing the essence of block parties that felt like reunions. People loved her work because she wrote with compassion, precision, and respect. Her father would say, "Baby girl, you have a gift. You see people who think they're invisible." Mary carried that sentence like a promise. She earned a scholarship to the University of Georgia, majoring in journalism. College was another world, bigger and open, filled with faces from everywhere. She worked hard, writing for the school newspaper, volunteering in literacy programs, interviewing students who didn't usually get attention. The faculty admired her drive. She wasn't just trying to get good grades. She wanted to leave an imprint. After graduation, she landed a job at a local Atlanta newspaper. Not a big national platform, but meaningful. She covered community issues, school funding shortages, cultural festivals, neighborhood heroes. She stayed rooted in the stories that mattered. Her apartment in Atlanta became her sanctuary. Walls filled with sticky notes, outlines, interview quotes. A cozy couch where she spent late nights typing up pieces she hoped would help someone feel heard. When she wasn't writing, she was in her aunt's kitchen learning to perfect collard greens, or at church clapping, along to gospel music, or strolling down Auburn Avenue, admiring murals that honored civil rights legends. Mary came from a world where everyone looked out for each other. A world where authenticity mattered more than status. A world where her identity was shaped by community, not wealth. And because of this foundation, Mary became the woman who would later stand up in a mansion filled with marble, face someone with more money than she could ever imagine, and refuse to let her marriage crumble. Atlanta had raised her to be strong. Atlanta had raised her to speak truth. Atlanta had raised her to love deeply and to stand firm when challenged. Mary didn't know it yet, but the strength she gained from her city would become the anchor that held her steady through one of the most painful chapters of her life. For now, she was simply a young woman doing what she loved, writing stories about her community, carrying her roots with pride, and living life with the quiet hope that one day she would meet someone who valued the same things she did: integrity, compassion, and heart. She had no idea that fate was already preparing that meeting, not in Atlanta, but in New York City, at a conference where her life would change in the most unexpected way. While Mary grew up surrounded by community warmth, Joe Beaumont's life unfolded in the quiet elegance of Chicago's upper-class suburbs. His childhood was polished, structured, and organized to perfection. He was the only child of Oliver and Celeste Beaumont. Oliver owned a prestigious architecture firm that designed corporate towers, high-end apartments, and civic buildings in major U.S. cities. Celeste ran a well-known philanthropic foundation, attended charity galas, and sat on boards where everything was measured by influence and reputation. The Beaumont household was large, tall windows, expensive artwork, rugs from trips abroad, yet strangely silent. Love wasn't absent, but it wasn't loud. It wasn't the type that hugged you in the kitchen or danced in the living room. It was more refined, restrained, spoken in polite words at dinner rather than in warm embraces. Joe attended elite private schools where most kids came from families just like his. Summers were spent in Europe visiting museums, historic districts, and architectural wonders. He never lacked anything material: clothes, tutors, opportunities, but sometimes he felt like he was living a life already planned before he was born. Still, he had qualities that didn't match the snobbish stereotype people expected from someone with his upbringing. Joe had a gentle nature, a soft heart that didn't fit the sharp corners of his world. He was the kind to hold doors for strangers, carry heavy bags for elderly neighbors, pause to listen to people who felt overlooked. His parents loved him, but they also had expectations. Oliver wanted him to eventually take over the firm. Celeste wanted him to marry a woman who could represent the family well, someone from an influential lineage, someone polished enough to handle Chicago society. Joe didn't argue. He rarely did. He learned early that it was easier to nod along than disrupt the image his parents had built around him. But he had his own dreams. He wanted to design spaces that improved communities, parks, accessible housing, youth centers. He wanted architecture that served people, not just profit. That's why he studied urban planning at Northwestern University. He excelled in his program, not because of privilege, but because he cared. Professors described him as thoughtful, dedicated, creative. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wanted to solve real problems. After graduating, he joined an urban design initiative focusing on city development projects. The work was meaningful, and Joe felt proud, but he still carried a quiet loneliness. He had friends, colleagues, acquaintances, but no one who understood him beyond his last name or bank account. His mother constantly encouraged him to date women from appropriate families. She organized lunches, charity meetings, introductions. Joe smiled politely, but inside, he felt suffocated. He wanted real love, authentic, grounded, built on connection instead of appearances. something different from the polished, staged world he grew up in. He longed for someone who didn't see him as a wealthy man with potential social benefits, but as the man who preferred simple conversations over fancy dinners. Still, he didn't know where or when he would meet someone like that. He only knew he wanted it. And that longing would soon lead him to New York, not for romance, but for a leadership conference where fate decided it was finally time for two very different worlds to collide. The conference hall in New York City buzzed with conversation, camera, flashes, and the sharp clicking of heels against polished floors. It was one of the biggest gatherings of community leaders, journalists, urban developers, and non-profit organizers. Mary wasn't attending as a guest. She was covering the event for her newspaper, interviewing speakers, capturing key moments, writing about how initiatives from across the country could impact local communities. Joe was a keynote speaker. His topic, designing inclusive cities. Their paths weren't supposed to cross in any dramatic way, but destiny has a quiet way of placing two people in the same moment at just the right time. After Joe's presentation, which Mary genuinely admired, he stepped off the stage with a warm smile and a stack of note cards. He looked approachable, even though his suit said money and upbringing. Mary, meanwhile, was finishing an interview near one of the side tables, jotting down quotes and organizing her notes. She looked up just as Joe turned to greet another attendee and bumped straight into her. Coffee splashed across the front of her notebook. Joe froze, eyes wide. "I am so sorry. I didn't see you there." Mary stepped back, wiping the corner of the notebook. "It's okay, really. I should have been paying attention." But Joe wasn't convinced. He insisted on helping, reaching for napkins, apologizing repeatedly. His awkward sincerity made Mary laugh, not mockingly, but softly, genuinely. "It's all right," she said again. "I'm Mary, by the way." "Joe," he replied. "I'm embarrassed to meet you like this." "Well," she smiled, "at least you didn't spill it on my clothes. My notebook can recover." They shared a small laugh that neither expected to linger. Over the rest of the day they kept crossing paths, in workshops, panel discussions, coffee lines. Each interaction felt natural, unforced. They exchanged thoughts on urban projects, journalism, community development. Joe found himself drawn to her passion, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about highlighting unheard stories. Mary admired Joe's humility, the way he spoke about architecture as a way to help people, not impress investors. By the end of the conference, Joe approached her one last time. "I'd really like to keep talking," he said. "If you don't mind, could we exchange numbers?" Mary hesitated for half a second, not because she didn't want to, but because she was cautious about people's intentions. But Joe's sincerity made the decision easy. "Sure," she said, handing him her phone. They exchanged numbers and parted ways with a smile that neither could fully explain. As Mary boarded her flight back to Atlanta, she looked at Joe's message. "I'm glad we met." Mary didn't know why, but her heart felt lighter. And in Chicago, Joe stared at her name in his contacts longer than he expected to. Something had begun. Something neither of them had planned for. Something they both needed. Their connection didn't fade when the conference ended. It grew. Joe messaged Mary first, a simple text asking how her trip home went. She responded. Then he asked about her article. She sent him the draft. He complimented her writing. She teased him about his formal tone. Before long, texting turned into calls. Calls turned into nightly conversations. Nightly conversations turned into anticipation. Joe flew to Atlanta for their first official date. He didn't plan something extravagant. He wanted something meaningful. He took her to a museum exhibit featuring urban art, knowing she appreciated creativity and storytelling. They walked along the Chicago River during another date, talking like old friends rather than new acquaintances. They shared stories about childhood, dreams, fears, and hopes. When Joe visited Atlanta again, he attended Mary's Sunday gospel brunch at her church. He clapped along, laughed with her family, even volunteered to help serve food. Aunt Tamika eyed him approvingly, which was rare. Mary noticed how Joe respected her culture, not as something exotic or unusual, but as something beautiful he wanted to understand. Joe admired how Mary carried herself with confidence. Not arrogant, not timid, just genuine. Long distance wasn't easy, but they managed it with honesty and effort. Video calls, handwritten notes, weekend visits. They built something strong, steady, and real. And little by little, two worlds that should have never crossed started blending into one. What they didn't know was that someone watching from afar believed their worlds should never mix at all. That someone was Celeste. Love didn't arrive in a loud moment for Mary and Joe. It settled into their lives quietly, naturally, the way sunrise creeps across a window before you even realize the morning has come. After months of long-distance calls, text messages, weekend visits, and conversations that stretched past midnight, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady and warm. They stopped calling their weekends together meetups and started calling them home. Mary would wake up on Saturday mornings in her Atlanta apartment to the sound of soft humming coming from her kitchen. Joe always woke earlier. He moved around quietly, trying not to disturb her. But the smell gave him away. Pancakes, butter sizzling on the pan, and freshly brewed coffee. Exactly the way she liked it. Medium roast, 1 spoon of brown sugar, a splash of creamer. The first morning he ever cooked for her, she shuffled into the kitchen half asleep, wearing her oversized t-shirt. Joe froze mid-flip, spatula in the air. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to wake you," he said. Mary leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching him with a grin tugging at her lips. "You didn't," she said. "I could get used to this." He tried to laugh, but he looked shy again, like he did when he first bumped into her at the conference. That made her giggle. She walked up behind him, wrapped her arms loosely around his waist, and rested her cheek against his back. "You're sweet," she murmured. "And you're distracting," he replied, pretending to be stern. When he finished cooking, he set the plate in front of her like she was royalty. She took a bite and closed her eyes. "Joe," she said dramatically, "you might be husband material." He nearly dropped the fork. "Too soon," she teased. "Yes," he said, then added quickly, "but not in a bad way." That small exchange became a ritual. Every visit, every weekend, every morning they were together. He made pancakes because Mary liked sweet starts to her day, and she danced with him between countertops when the syrup dripped or when the butter popped. The kitchen dance wasn't planned. It just happened one morning when Joe spilled syrup on the floor and cursed. Under his breath, softly, because he was still trying to impress her. Mary leaned down with a paper towel, bumped his shoulder, and laughed. "Come on," she said. "Move with me." Joe blinked, like he wasn't sure if she meant it. "Dance, right now." "Yes," she said, pulling him in by the front of his shirt. "Right now." He let out a nervous laugh. She swayed slowly. He followed. It was simple, sweet, and unpolished, nothing like the choreographed ballroom dances his mother used to force him into at charity galas. Mary rested her head against his chest, and Joe closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt fully present. Museum visits also became part of their rhythm. When Mary visited Chicago, they wandered through exhibits like two people discovering the world through each other's eyes. She loved modern art, bold colors, street murals that told stories. Joe loved architectural sketches, vintage maps, and interactive city planning displays. They would stand in front of a piece, share quiet thoughts, debate meanings, and sometimes tease each other. One evening at the Museum of Contemporary Art, they walked past a sculpture that was nothing but a twisted metal frame. Mary tilted her head. "What do you think it means?" she asked. Joe crossed his arms. "Structural imbalance trying to represent chaos?" Mary snorted. "Or the artist ran out of ideas and welded scraps together." He burst into laughter, surprising even himself. People turned to look. Mary grinned proudly. She loved making him laugh. After the museum, they often grabbed late-night takeout and sat on her apartment floor, eating fries from the same box, legs tangled, talking about their dreams. Joe told her about wanting to design public spaces that felt safe for everyone. Mary told him about wanting to write stories that mattered. "You know," he said quietly one night, "being with you feels easy, like the world slows down." Mary nudged him with her knee. "That's how it's supposed to feel." And it did. Their love wasn't flashy or rushed. It grew in laughter, shared meals, quiet conversations, warm touches, and the comfort of simply being themselves. Every weekend together deepened what they were building. Every goodbye made the next reunion sweeter. Every small ritual made something clear. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't casual. This was a life taking shape, one pancake, one slow dance, one adventure at a time. When Mary decided it was time to bring Joe deeper into her world, she did it with intention. Atlanta wasn't just her home, it was the soil she grew from. If a man was going to love her, he needed to love the roots that made her who she was. One of the most important traditions in her life was the Sunday gospel brunch at her church. Not a touristy brunch, not a glam restaurant buffet, a soulful gathering of neighbors. Aunties, uncles, church mothers and friends who had watched Mary grow up. She warned Joe ahead of time. "People here are affectionate," she said, "and loud, and nosy." He smiled. "Sounds like a good challenge." "Challenge?" She laughed. "Baby, you're walking into a family reunion you didn't know you were invited to." When they arrived, music filled the hall. A live band warming up, the choir, humming harmonies. People greeting each other with hugs and laughter. Children ran around, aunties adjusted hats, and the smell of mac and cheese drifted from the kitchen. Joe looked slightly overwhelmed, but in a good way. Mary took his hand. "Come on, I want you to meet Aunt Tamika." Tamika was the kind of woman who hugged with her whole body. She wrapped Joe in her arms before he could even introduce himself. "Lord, Mary, you didn't tell me he was this handsome," she exclaimed. Joe turned bright red. Mary nearly doubled over laughing. During brunch, Joe sat beside Mary as choir members started singing, powerful, soulful voices that shook the room. He clapped along awkwardly at first, unsure of the rhythm, but Mary nudged him with her shoulder. "Loosen up," she whispered. When the food was served, Joe helped hand out plates, fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread, yams. He didn't make a show of it. He simply moved with kindness, asking people what they preferred, offering to carry dishes, smiling politely even when someone teased him about being the new boy. Tamika watched him closely, the way mothers and aunties do when sizing up a man for their niece. She wasn't looking for perfection. She was looking for sincerity. And Joe passed every silent test. By the end of the brunch, Tamika pulled Mary aside. "This one's special," she whispered. "I see the way he looks at you, and the way he respects this place." Mary's throat warmed. After brunch, Mary led Joe on a walk through her childhood neighborhood, pointing out the corner store where she used to buy snacks after school, the community center where she tutored younger kids, the mural painted in honor of local legends. "This is where I learned everything about life," she said. "Love, loyalty, resilience, all of it." Joe squeezed her hand gently. "I'm honored to see it," he said. Really, that day, he didn't treat her world like a novelty. He treated it like something sacred, something he wanted to understand and appreciate. And Mary saw in his eyes that he wasn't faking anything. He didn't try to act overly impressed. He didn't put on a show. He simply embraced her life with respect and openness. It made her heart expand in a way she hadn't expected. By the time they returned to her apartment that evening, she felt lighter, safer, more connected. "This feels right," she whispered to herself later, watching Joe wash dishes as if he had lived there for years. And deep down, she knew. Her family would accept him. Her community would embrace him. Because Joe wasn't just visiting her world. He was treating it like home. When it was Joe's turn to bring Mary into his world, he worried. Not because he doubted her, but because he knew what his world looked like. Structured, formal, judgmental in ways people pretended not to notice. Still, he wanted her there. He wanted her beside him. He wanted people to see that she was the woman he chose. The first event he brought her to was a charity gala hosted by his mother's foundation. It wasn't a simple dinner. It was the kind of event where people whispered about designer outfits, exchanged business cards, and judged without blinking. Mary stood out immediately, not because she didn't fit in, but because she carried herself with confidence. Her natural beauty, her steady smile, her calm presence. She entered the room like someone who knew she belonged in any space she walked into. Joe's colleagues noticed. Some smiled genuinely. Some glanced, whispered, then looked again. Mary didn't shrink. She held Joe's hand. She introduced herself with grace. She spoke intelligently about journalism, community work, and culture. But she also noticed something. Whenever someone asked her a question, they often followed up with, "Oh, you're from Atlanta? Interesting. Oh, journalism. That must be fulfilling. Oh, you work locally? That's admirable." Micro comments laced with polite dismissal. Mary didn't flinch, but she clocked every single one. Joe saw it too. Every time her smile faded even slightly, he squeezed her hand. Every time someone tried to corner him in a conversation that excluded her, he pulled her back to his side. Later that night, Joe took her to an architecture networking dinner, a quieter, more professional gathering. The people there respected Joe for his talent, not his family name. They listened to Mary more sincerely. They asked real questions. Mary felt comfortable there. She could breathe. She admired how Joe spoke passionately about designing inclusive communities. His colleagues praised his creativity and work ethic. Mary watched him in that room, proud and impressed. When the dinner ended, Joe walked her to the car. "Be honest," he said. "How did tonight feel?" Mary hesitated, then answered truthfully, "Your work circle? I like them. Your gala circle? Well, some of them made it clear I wasn't what they expected." Joe sighed. "I know. I'm sorry." "You didn't do anything wrong," she replied. "It's just different." He looked at her, his expression soft. "We'll navigate it together." And he meant that, because even if his world was polished, intimidating, and full of quiet judgments, Joe wanted Mary in it, not as an accessory, not as someone he needed to justify, but as his partner. The early tension didn't arrive through arguments. It arrived through moments, brief, sharp, easily overlooked, but impossible to ignore. One evening, after another elegant dinner in Chicago, Mary and Joe walked back to his car in silence. Driving through the city, Joe finally asked, "You're quiet. Everything okay?" Mary stared at the passing lights. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice said otherwise. Joe waited. She exhaled. "Some of your mother's friends. They weren't rude, but they weren't welcoming either." Joe tightened his grip on the wheel. "What did they say?" Mary looked out the window again. Nothing direct, just questions that felt more like evaluations, like they were measuring me against some list. Joe pulled the car over, turning to face her fully. "You don't deserve that," he said firmly. Mary shrugged. "It comes with the territory. It shouldn't." She held his gaze. "It happens in every world, Joe. People judge. It's just your circle judges differently." He swallowed. "I didn't realize how harsh it could be." Mary touched his arm gently. "I'm not angry. I just need you to understand that sometimes it's not what people say, it's how they look at me." Joe nodded, shame tugging at him. "I'll handle it. I promise." But the tension wasn't only from his social circle. Some of Mary's friends in Atlanta had their own questions. "Girl, you sure he's not just curious because you're different? You think his family is going to accept you? You ready for that high society lifestyle?" Mary defended him every time. "He's not like that," she said. "He respects my culture. He supports my career." But the doubts they planted still lingered. One afternoon, Mary visited Joe's condo in Chicago. She noticed framed photos of him with polished, wealthy families, elegant women in gowns, men in tuxedos. She wasn't insecure, but she wondered how she looked compared to the women his mother imagined for him. That night, she asked him, "Were you ever expected to marry someone from your circle?" Joe hesitated. Expected, probably. But wanting to? No. Are you sure? Yes, he said without blinking. I've never been more sure of anything. Still, she felt the pressure rising around them, not from him, but from the worlds they came from. The whispers grew. Joe's colleagues occasionally joked. Beaumont. Dating outside the circle, huh? His mother asked, Are you thinking this through? Mary's cousins teased. Chicago money, better treat you right. None of it was malicious on the surface. But the weight added up, and for the first time, both Mary and Joe felt something shifting. Not their love, that part was strong, but the energy around them, a quiet tension, a sense that someone, somewhere, wasn't comfortable with this love blending two very different worlds. Someone whose opinion mattered more than anyone else's. Someone who was already planning to interfere. Celeste Beaumont was the type of woman who measured life by perfection. Not in an aggressive way, in a rehearsed, polished way that made her appear gracious on the outside, while hiding the firm expectations she carried within. Her world was filled with elegant dinner settings, pristine tablecloths, pearl earrings passed down from generations of socially prominent women, and carefully curated friendships built on reputation rather than intimacy. From the moment Joe was born, Celeste imagined a life for him that mirrored her own upbringing, structured, refined, aligned with legacy. She pictured him marrying a woman who fit seamlessly into Chicago's elite circles, someone raised with the same etiquette lessons, someone groomed for fundraising galas, someone who knew which wine paired with which entree, someone who could stand beside him at benefit events without feeling out of place. In Celeste's mind, her son's future wife would come from a family with long-established wealth, a background that matched the Beaumont reputation, a lifestyle free from questions or unfamiliar traditions, a lineage she could be proud to introduce at her foundation events. She didn't despise people outside her circle, but she feared what she didn't understand. And Mary represented everything Celeste didn't plan for. Joe told her about the journalist he met in New York, the woman who inspired him, challenged him, and intrigued him from the start. Celeste listened with polite enthusiasm, but inside, she felt a knot forming. She imagined this Mary from Atlanta as someone different from their world, someone warm, yes, kind perhaps, but not someone who could navigate the social environment Joe grew up in. What Celeste didn't expect was to meet Mary and discover that she wasn't simply different. She was strong, confident, grounded, and unashamed of her background. Mary didn't try to impress her. Mary didn't try to assimilate. Mary didn't speak with hesitation or uncertainty, and that alone unsettled Celeste. The first time Joe officially introduced Mary to his mother, Celeste extended a graceful hand, offered a practiced smile, and complimented Mary's dress. Outwardly, she was every bit the charming hostess, but, internally, she was already checking boxes. Does she fit? Can she adjust? Will she elevate our image or complicate it? It wasn't malicious. It was rooted in decades of social conditioning. The belief that one must maintain appearances to preserve the family legacy. Celeste couldn't comprehend how someone like Mary, with a background so different from theirs, could fully integrate into the world she imagined for Joe. She began to think of Mary as a temporary chapter, something Joe would eventually grow out of. Someone cute, warm-hearted, brilliant, but not meant for the Beaumont family name. Celeste wanted for her son what she thought was best, but what she wanted and what Joe needed were not the same. That disconnect would soon shape everything that followed. Whenever Mary visited Chicago, Celeste treated her with courtesy, flawless, proper, immaculate courtesy. The kind that smiled warmly but never fully welcomed. The kind that asked questions but never let the answers change anything. Mary felt the shift almost immediately. At dinner one night, Celeste complimented Mary's writing career with that smile, the polite, careful one that said, "Good for you, even if I don't fully understand it." Mary responded graciously, speaking about her community stories, her editorial projects, and her passion for highlighting voices that deserve to be heard. Celeste nodded along. but her eyes betrayed the small discomfort she tried so hard to hide. Later in the evening, Celeste asked questions that appeared harmless on the surface. How is journalism treating you these days? Do you feel secure in your field? Is the work environment stable? Mary recognized the tone. It wasn't curiosity, it was subtle evaluation. Joe noticed too. He squeezed Mary's hand under the table, silently apologizing. When guests at Celeste's gatherings asked Mary about her background, the conversation always took a predictable turn. Oh, Atlanta. That must be lively. Local newspaper? How interesting. You work directly with communities? That's admirable. Mary never snapped back. She answered with calm confidence, refusing to let anyone make her feel small. But she saw Celeste glance toward her friends after each response, as if silently reassuring them. She's nice, but don't worry, she's not permanent. Celeste wasn't trying to be cruel. She simply couldn't shake the notion that Mary didn't belong in the family's upper circle. Every tradition Mary carried, from soulful music to community cookouts, to her journalist's lens on life, felt unfamiliar to Celeste. Mary's authenticity clashed with Celeste's obsession for preserving image. Still, Mary didn't want to assume the worst. She believed in giving people grace. She believed in addressing issues directly once they became unavoidable. But as weeks turned into months, she couldn't ignore the small shifts. Celeste's smile tightening whenever Mary took Joe's hand, the way conversations switched when Mary entered a room, the hushed tones at the end of the table, the soft glances that carried silent disapproval. Joe tried to soften the tension. He invited Mary to his father's architecture gatherings, spaces where people respected intellect more than lineage. Mary thrived there. She asked insightful questions, impressed industry leaders, and connected with people who valued her perspective. Oliver liked her, genuinely. Celeste noticed that too, and it made her even more uneasy. She began hosting more events, as if hoping to shift the balance, as if trying to show her son a better fit. But with every encounter, her discomfort grew, not because Mary lacked anything, but because Mary possessed a strength Celeste hadn't anticipated, a grace rooted in culture, community, resilience, and truth. Mary didn't try to bend. She didn't shrink. She didn't try to camouflage her background. She showed up exactly as herself. And while that impressed Joe, it unsettled Celeste. Celeste's discomfort didn't explode into confrontation. It slipped in through carefully chosen words, calm tones, and gentle suggestions wrapped in concern. Joe first noticed it during a visit, when Celeste poured him tea and said, "Honey, you're young. Maybe take things slower. There's no need to rush anything." He frowned. "We're not rushing. I just want you to be certain," she replied. "That's all." "Another day," she asked. "Have you thought about the future? Where you'll live? What lifestyle choices will look like with someone from a different background?" Joe set his jaw. "Mary and I already talk about those things." Celeste smiled lightly. "Well, think carefully, sweetheart." Her tone was soft, too soft, in a way that felt planned. Mary wasn't present during these private nudges. Celeste was strategic. She wanted to influence Joe without appearing judgmental. She often masked her concerns as care. "Joe, be sure she understands your world. Have you discussed long-term expectations? People from different cultures sometimes clash. I just don't want you to struggle." Joe didn't appreciate the direction these conversations were heading. He knew what his mother meant, but didn't say aloud. "And still," she continued, one afternoon she approached him again. "Honey, you need someone who can walk comfortably in your circle, someone who enhances your image, not complicates it." Joe's eyes hardened. "Mary isn't a complication," he said sharply. Celeste blinked, surprised by his tone. "I didn't say she was. I'm simply asking you to be realistic." He walked away, frustrated. But Celeste wasn't done. She reached out to one of her event planners, Tina, a woman who often helped with high-profile galas. Tina was young, polished, charming, and familiar with the Beaumont lifestyle. Celeste didn't openly reveal her intentions, but she hinted. Keep an eye on Mary. Observe her. And, if conversations arise naturally about Joe's world, well, feel free to offer perspective. Tina smiled knowingly. Celeste's request was clear enough. Celeste told herself she wasn't trying to tear them apart. She believed she was protecting her son. But the more she tried to guide events, the more she planted silent pressure, suggesting other suitable women in conversations, mentioning families she wanted Joe to network with, praising couples whose lifestyles aligned with hers, highlighting potential cultural and social clashes. Joe began to feel cornered in ways he couldn't articulate. Joe changed, not dramatically, not in ways that screamed trouble, but Mary felt it. He became more distracted during their video calls, more hesitant in certain conversations, more unsure when she asked simple questions like, "Everything okay? You seem distant. What's on your mind?" He always answered with the same reassurance, "I'm fine, love, just tired." But Mary knew him. She could read silence the way she read news stories, sensing what wasn't being said. When Joe visited Atlanta next, she noticed him checking his phone more often, pausing before answering messages, staring at screens longer than usual. He wasn't hiding anything intentionally. He was conflicted. Meanwhile, Mary felt the shift in Joe's energy and the unspoken tension whenever Chicago came up. One evening, she gently asked, "Did something happen with your mother?" Joe looked down at his hands. "She's concerned," he finally admitted. "She thinks we should take things slower." Mary nodded slowly. "And what do you think?" "I think she's misunderstanding everything," he said honestly. "But she's been pressuring me. I didn't want to stress you about it." Mary breathed deeply. "I'm not easily shaken," she replied softly. "But I need to know when something affects you. We can't fix what we don't face together." Joe nodded, appreciating her steadiness but struggling with guilt. He didn't want Mary to carry this weight. He didn't want to bring conflict from Chicago into her peaceful world. But the pressure was beginning to take a toll. Mary sensed it too, not the kind that breaks love, but the kind that warns of storms forming in another room. Little did they know, this was only the beginning. The subtle nudges from Celeste were soon going to escalate into something far more deliberate, something that would test everything they had built. The shift in Joe didn't happen overnight. It crept in little by little, showing up in places where warmth once lived. At first, Mary didn't think much of it. Everyone gets busy, everyone has long days. But Joe's distractions became a pattern. It started with a cancelled date. They were supposed to meet in Nashville for a weekend getaway, halfway between Atlanta and Chicago. It was meant to be a break from the pressure hanging in the air, something to remind them of who they were before outside voices got louder. Mary booked her flight, packed her bag, and even sent him a picture of her suitcase with the caption, "Hotel breakfast and long walks tomorrow." Joe didn't respond for almost an hour, unusual for him. Finally, he texted, "Love, something came up. I'm sorry." She called immediately. His voice sounded strained, not angry, not cold, just tight. "Work issue," he said. "I'm dealing with something with my team." Mary didn't doubt he had work responsibilities, but something about the vagueness made her uneasy. "Okay," she replied gently. "We'll reschedule." He thanked her, but his tone felt distant, like he was talking while looking over his shoulder. Over the next few days, communication grew thinner. Shorter messages, less laughter, more pauses, more sighs, more "I'm tired," more "let's talk later." A week after the cancelled trip, Joe forgot their usual video call night. Mary waited on her couch, laptop open, popcorn in a bowl, their routine for virtual movie night. 30 minutes passed. An hour. 2. She finally called him. He answered with a startled breath, like he'd just been pulled out of deep thought. "Oh, Mary. I'm so sorry. I meant to call. Are you okay?" she asked. "Just a long day. Really long." She didn't push. She didn't guilt trip. She simply listened. But inside, something tugged at her. This wasn't the man who used to stay awake on the phone with her until one of them fell asleep mid-sentence. This wasn't the man who sent good morning texts before she opened her eyes. This wasn't the man who traveled across states just to see her for 24 hours. Something, or someone, had gotten to him. Mary knew stress. She knew exhaustion. But this felt like more than both. The man she loved was slipping into a fog she couldn't name. And she had no idea why. 2 weeks later, Joe came to Atlanta for a short visit. Mary hoped being together in person would clear things up. But the moment he arrived, she felt it in the air. The tension sitting. Behind his eyes, the heaviness he tried to disguise with a smile. He hugged her tightly when he stepped inside her apartment. The embrace felt real, steady, familiar. But when he pulled away, he kept glancing at his phone. It started that evening while Mary was cooking dinner. Joe stepped into her bedroom to take a call. He spoke in a low voice, too low. Not angry, not broken, but careful. Mary stirred the pot on the stove, trying not to overthink it. But the walls were thin, and she caught fragments. No, not right now. I told you I'd handle it. Don't bring this up again. She paused mid-stir, her breath catching. Joe returned with a forced smile. That was work, he said, too quickly. Everything okay? She asked. Yeah, just complicated stuff. Mary nodded, but the unease grew. The next day, while they were walking through Piedmont Park, Joe's phone vibrated again. He stopped mid-conversation. His hand shook slightly as he silenced the call. Not declined, silenced. Mary's eyes narrowed gently. Who keeps calling you? She asked. Just someone from my mother's foundation, he said. Someone, or your mother. Joe hesitated. There, the truth peeked through the cracks. It's a situation she's dealing with, he said vaguely, and she keeps asking for my help. Mary didn't push further. Not then. But the worry grew roots inside her chest. Later that night, she heard him whispering again outside on her balcony. He ended the call abruptly when he saw her standing in the doorway. Long week, he said, running a hand through his hair. Sorry, I'm not fully here. Mary stepped close, placed a hand on his cheek. I'm not here to judge you, she said softly. But I need to know when something is wrong. Joe swallowed hard. I'm working through it, he murmured. I promise. Mary believed in love, communication, honesty, but she also believed in watching patterns. And Joe's behavior, the calls, the tension, the shrinking details, all pointed to something he wasn't saying, something bigger than work, something he felt guilty about, something he was afraid to confess. She just didn't know what yet, but she was about to. The night everything changed was supposed to be ordinary. Mary had flown to Chicago for a weekend at Joe's condo, hoping the distance between them would shrink. She cooked dinner, they watched a small documentary, and for a moment the tension faded. Then Joe's phone rang. He froze. Mary glanced at the screen, not long enough to read names, but long enough to see the look on his face. Fear. Not of the caller, but of Mary hearing the call. Let me take this outside, he said quickly. He stepped into the kitchen, not far, but far enough that he thought she couldn't hear. Mary didn't follow. She didn't pry. But the condo layout carried sound. A quiet pause. Then a voice, Celeste's, sharp, controlled. Why is she still here, Joe? You're confusing yourself. Mary's heartbeat stilled. Joe whispered, Mom, stop. I'm not having this argument again. Celeste's voice tightened. This relationship is temporary. Tina already told you she planted enough doubt. Mary should have stepped back by now. Mary felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Tina. Planted doubt. Should have stepped back. Celeste continued. You paid her already. She did her part. She convinced Mary you weren't sure. She followed my instructions exactly. Joe breathed out shakily. I didn't ask you to do any of that. I didn't want this. You didn't stop it, Celeste replied coldly. And you know why. She's not right for our circle. You will thank me later. Mary's stomach dropped. Her hands trembled. Her breath wavered. Paid. Planned. Sabotage. All orchestrated behind soft smiles. Her ears rang. Her body felt weightless, her vision blurred, not from shock alone but heartbreak. She stepped back from the hallway, gripping the wall. The truth wasn't gradual. It wasn't hinted at. It wasn't subtle. It hit with full force. Celeste had paid Tina to interfere, to create doubts, to rattle her confidence, to quietly tear apart a relationship she never approved of. And Joe hadn't protected her from it. Even if he hadn't planned it, even if he hadn't agreed, he had known something was wrong. Mary's chest tightened as she placed a hand over her heart. This was betrayal, not just from Celeste, but from the silence Joe kept. He ended the call minutes later, but by then, everything had already changed. Mary didn't cry at first. Shock held her still, frozen, breath shallow, eyes unfocused. Joe found her standing in the hallway when he returned. "Mary," he said gently. "What's wrong?" Her voice didn't rise. She didn't scream. She didn't accuse. She simply asked, "How long have you known?" Joe's face drained of color. "Mary, I heard everything," she said softly. "I heard your mother. I heard the plan. I heard Tina's name. I heard the payment part." Joe stepped forward, desperate. "It wasn't my idea." "But you knew," she whispered. Not angry, not loud, just broken. Joe swallowed hard, eyes filling with guilt. "I should have told you," he said. "I should have stopped her sooner. I felt stuck. I didn't want to drag you into her tactics." Mary shook her head slowly. "She paid someone to lie to me, to interfere with my peace, to make me think you didn't want me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Joe reached for her hand. She stepped back. "Mary, please. How could you let this happen?" Her voice trembled. "Even if you didn't agree, why didn't you protect us?" Joe pressed his palms to his forehead. "I tried to manage it. I tried to keep it away from you." "That's the problem," she whispered. "You kept it away from me. You were supposed to be my safe place." She finally broke. Tears streamed down her face, but quietly, the kind that hurt more because they held everything she'd been carrying. Every doubt, every whisper, every moment she'd felt the shift, every cancelled call, every strange silence, every unease she didn't want to believe. Joe stepped closer, eyes soft with regret. "I didn't want you to suffer from my mother's pressure," he murmured. "I thought if I handled it privately, it would fade." Mary's shoulders shook. "It didn't fade," she said. "It grew, and I felt it, and I wondered why. And now I know." Joe reached for her face gently. She let him touch her cheek because love doesn't vanish in one blow. "But trust fractures," Mary whispered. "I loved you with everything in me. I believed in us. But your mother used money to tear me apart, and instead of shielding me, you tried to shield her." Joe closed his eyes, pained. "I'm going to fix this," he said. "I swear I will." But Mary stepped back again. "Fixing something your mother planned and paid for? That's not a quick apology, Joe. That's a wound." She turned away before he could speak again, not out of spite but to breathe, because her world had shifted, because love shouldn't have to compete with money, expectations, or manipulation, because this wasn't simply heartbreak. It was betrayal disguised as protection, and it would change everything that came next. Mary didn't sleep that night. She sat at Joe's dining table long after he'd gone to bed, the same table where they once shared. Late-night takeout, laughed over documentaries, and talked about future plans in quiet whispers. Now the table held something much heavier. The papers she printed, the messages she overheard, and the truth that shattered the picture she thought they were painting together. Her fingers shook as she organized the papers again. Not because she doubted what she heard, she didn't, but because she still loved him. And loving someone while being hurt by them creates a pain nothing prepares you for. By the time the sun crept through the windows, Mary had made her decision. She walked to the bedroom. Joe was sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, palms pressed against his forehead. He hadn't slept either. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up, his eyes swollen from a night of guilt, fear, and realization. "Mary," his voice cracked. She didn't shout. She didn't break down. She placed the printed pages on the bed beside him, one by one, without saying a word. Joe stared at them, frozen. Mary finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "Before you start explaining, before you apologize, before you try to fix anything, I need you to hear me." Joe swallowed hard and nodded. Mary sat down, but not too close. "You didn't betray me with another woman," she said. "But silence can be betrayal too." His eyes wavered. She continued, "I watched you struggle these past few weeks. I watched you pull away. I watched you answer calls in the other room. I watched you pretend everything was fine when I knew something wasn't." Joe ran a hand through his hair. "I wasn't trying to lie." "I know," Mary whispered. "But you didn't protect me either." He shut his eyes, shame covering his face. Mary turned the first page toward him, the one with the message thread. "You let your mother hire someone to create doubts in our relationship," she said. "Even if you didn't agree, even if you didn't approve, you let it happen." Joe inhaled sharply. "I didn't know she paid Tina until recently," he said. "I thought Tina was just one of my mother's friends running her mouth. I didn't know she was being paid to interfere." Mary's heartbeat paused. "Recently?" she repeated. "Which means you knew before last night." He nodded slowly, painfully. His voice came out small. "I found out days ago. I was trying to figure out how to stop her. I didn't want to bring more chaos to you." Mary blinked through the sting behind her eyes. "So you protected me by keeping me in the dark?" Joe's hands trembled. "No, I protected you poorly," he admitted. "I didn't handle any of this the right way." Mary stood. "That's the problem, Joe. You were trying to protect me from the truth, instead of protecting us from your mother." He looked up at her like a man realizing he'd damaged something he never wanted to lose. "Mary, I love you," he whispered. "Nothing about this changes that." "I know you love me," she said. "But love has to be backed by actions. And when someone was trying to sabotage our home, you froze instead of fighting for us." Her voice wavered, but she held herself together. "For the first time since I met you, I don't know where we stand." Joe stood too, slowly, cautiously, as if afraid she might step back again. "Mary, I'm begging you, don't leave, don't walk away." He swallowed. "Let me fix this." She studied him carefully, the guilt, the fear, the sincerity. Mary's heart wasn't hardened. It was wounded, and wounds don't disappear in a moment. "We're going to fix it," she finally said. "But not by you shielding me, not by pretending everything is fine, not by tiptoeing around your mother." He breathed out shakily. "Then how?" he asked. She looked straight into his eyes. "We face the truth together." Joe collapsed onto the couch as the weight of everything pressed on him. It was one thing to feel his mother's disapproval. It was another thing entirely to see her actions written in plain words, proof of deliberate interference. He picked up the printed messages with trembling hands. His own voice sounded foreign to him. She hired her. She actually hired her. Mary stayed quiet, letting the realization break fully inside him. Joe kept reading, message after message, each one hitting harder than the last. The instructions, the payment confirmation, the timeline, the lines telling Tina to make Mary question the relationship, the hint to create emotional distance so Joe would feel confused. Joe's stomach twisted. "Why would she do this?" he whispered. Mary answered softly, "Because she wanted control." He lowered the pages and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as everything unraveled in his mind. He thought of every moment he doubted himself, every moment he felt torn between two worlds, every time he wondered why Mary assumed he was pulling away. It wasn't him. It was the echo of someone else's manipulation. Joe clenched his fists. "I trusted her," he said quietly. "She used that trust against both of us." Mary didn't interrupt. He needed to break. He needed to feel the full truth. "My whole life," Joe continued, "she taught me that she wanted the best for me, that she was protecting me, that everything she did came from love." He swallowed. "But this isn't love. This is control disguised as protection." His voice cracked, just slightly, but Mary heard it. Joe placed his head in his hands. "I can't believe she paid someone," he whispered again. "To hurt you, to push you out, to manipulate our relationship." Mary sat next to him, not too close, but close enough to let him feel her presence. "She didn't care who she hurt," Mary said softly. "Not you, not me. She cared about preserving her world." Joe wiped his face with his sleeve. "I should have seen it. I should have known something was wrong." Mary shook her head. "You're not responsible for your mother's choices," she said gently. "But you are responsible for how you respond now." Joe lifted his eyes to hers. "That's why I need to face her," he said. "Not alone, not secretly, not in half-truths. I need to look her in the eye and confront what she did." Mary held his gaze. "And I'm coming with you," he exhaled shakily. "You'd do that? After everything she put you through?" Mary nodded once, solid, firm, steady. "This isn't just your fight anymore. She crossed into my world. She attacked my peace. She interfered with our love. I'm standing beside you because this isn't just about your mother. It's about our future." Joe looked away, not out of shame, but out of the overwhelming mix of relief and guilt. He never expected Mary to stay. He never expected her to walk beside him toward the person who caused her this much pain. But Mary wasn't afraid of Celeste Beaumont. Truth didn't scare her. Lies did. And those lies were finally going to be exposed. The decision was made in silence, but the silence wasn't empty. Mary stood up first, gathering the papers again, not to hide them, but to prepare for what was coming. Joe rose beside her. "I don't want you anywhere near her right now," he said quietly. "You've been hurt enough." Mary held his eyes with calm strength. "This isn't about being near her," she replied. "It's about clarity. Your mother needs to see the truth in front of her, not filtered through. You, not softened by guilt, not reshaped into something convenient." Joe rubbed the back of his neck. "She's going to deny everything." Mary let out a soft exhale. "She can deny, she can twist, she can pretend. But the truth is on paper, and I heard it myself." Joe felt a mix of fear and determination. He wasn't afraid of confrontation. He was afraid of losing Mary in the process. He took her hand slowly. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked. "For not giving up on me." Mary squeezed his hand. "Love doesn't disappear because someone else tried to poison it. Your mother used money. We're using truth." Joe felt her words settle inside him like an anchor. He nodded firmly. "Then we face her." They spent the next hour gathering everything they needed. Mary printed another set of the messages. Joe wrote down the timeline he remembered, dates, calls, moments when he sensed something was off. For the first time, they weren't just reacting, they were preparing. Mary grabbed her coat. Joe picked up the car keys. "Are you sure?" he asked again. A final check, a final moment to back out if she needed space. Mary closed the door behind them. "Yes," she said. "We're doing this together." And that was it. The decision was locked. For the first time in weeks, Joe felt clarity. Not the kind his mother wanted, but the truth he needed to face. He wasn't walking into a battle alone. He wasn't choosing between two worlds. He was standing beside the woman he loved, fully, openly, without hesitation. Mary wasn't going to be sidelined again. She wasn't going to be manipulated again. She wasn't going to be quietly picked apart by people who didn't understand her worth. Their unity wasn't perfect. It wasn't unhurt. It wasn't unscarred. But it was real. And that realness was stronger than anything Celeste had planned. The drive to Celeste's mansion was long, quiet and heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Chicago's skyline rose in the distance like a reminder of the world they were stepping into, the world that once welcomed Joe and evaluated Mary. Joe kept one hand on the wheel, the other clenched on his thigh. Mary watched the city grow larger through the window, not afraid, but preparing herself mentally. The silence between them wasn't cold. It wasn't tense. It was focused. Every now and then, Joe glanced at her. "You okay?" he asked softly. Mary nodded. "Are you?" "No," he admitted honestly. But I will be once this is done. He swallowed. I've stood up to colleagues before, to investors, to board members. But standing up to my mother, this is different. Mary placed her hand on his arm. Courage isn't the absence of fear, she said quietly. It's choosing truth, even when fear is screaming. Joe breathed out slowly. Your strength amazes me, he said. Every single time. Mary gave a gentle half smile. Love taught me strength, and pain sharpened it. He squeezed her hand. As they got closer to Celeste's neighborhood, the streets became more polished, the houses larger, the trees manicured, a world built on wealth and quiet rules. Mary had walked through these streets before, smiling, trying, being polite, being respectful. But today was different. She wasn't coming as someone Celeste could evaluate. She wasn't coming as someone to be judged. She wasn't coming as a guest in Joe's life. She was coming as a woman who knew the truth and was ready to speak it. The gates to Celeste's mansion came into view. Joe slowed the car. His heart pounded. Mary inhaled deeply. This wasn't a scene either of them ever imagined, driving to confront the very person who attacked the foundation of their love. But it was necessary. Mary reached for Joe's hand again. Whatever happens inside that house, she said softly, we face it side by side. No more hiding, no more shielding, no more secrets. Joe nodded, emotion tightening his throat. I'm with you, he whispered. All the way, and with that, he turned into the driveway. The gates closed behind them. Truth, the truth Celeste tried to bury under money and manipulation, was finally coming home. The Beaumont mansion was silent as Mary and Joe stepped through the front doors. Not the peaceful kind of silence, the tense kind that comes before a storm. Celeste appeared at the top of the staircase, poised as ever in a pearl-white blouse and tailored slacks. Her posture was straight, chin lifted, every step down the staircase. As controlled as the life she built around structure and image. She smiled when she saw them. Not warm, not affectionate, but polite. The kind she used when hosting donors or neighbors she needed to impress. Joseph, she said gently, reaching out for a cheek kiss. You didn't tell me you were stopping by. Joe didn't move to meet her kiss. Celeste's smile froze for a fraction of a second. Then she saw Mary standing slightly behind him, composed, steady, eyes calm but unreadable. Oh, Mary, Celeste said with a courteous nod. You're here too. Mary returned the nod. Good morning, Celeste. Celeste's eyes flicked between the two of them, her intuition stirring. Is everything all right? She asked with a small laugh. You both look tense. Joe cleared his throat. We need to talk, he said. Celeste tilted her head, confused but maintaining her graceful composure. About what, sweetheart? Joe didn't answer. He stepped aside. Mary walked past him, holding a thick brown envelope in her hand. She didn't slam it down. She didn't brandish it with anger. She placed it gently on the mahogany dining table, centered, precise, intentional. Celeste watched with growing unease. What is that? She asked. Mary stepped back, keeping her gaze steady. Everything you hoped I wouldn't find. Celeste blinked. I beg your pardon. Joe's voice tightened. Mom, sit down. Celeste let out a soft, humorless laugh. You're worrying me. What's going on? Joe didn't respond with any softness this time. Sit down. Something in his tone made Celeste obey. She lowered herself into a chair, hands placed neatly in her lap, eyes darting between them, searching for clues, trying to understand what she had lost control of. Mary stood across from her, calm but not cold, composed but not passive. Celeste studied her face carefully. Did something happen? She asked. Joseph, why do you look so upset? Mary answered for him. Because he finally knows the truth. Celeste straightened her back slightly. What truth? Mary motioned toward the envelope. The kind you can't dismiss with a smile. Celeste exhaled slowly. You're being dramatic, Mary. What on earth would I need to hide from you? Joe leaned forward, his voice low. You already know. For the first time, Celeste's confidence dimmed. Just a flicker, but enough. Mary watched her expression shift. She wasn't here to destroy Celeste. She was here to expose what needed to be exposed. Nothing more, nothing less. We came, Mary said, because lies don't heal themselves. And because pretending didn't work anymore. Celeste didn't respond. Her eyes moved to the envelope cautiously, like she already feared what it contained. Mary opened the envelope and pulled everything out, spreading each sheet across the dining table. Celeste inhaled slowly as the papers fanned out. Screenshots, printed messages, bank records, notes. Her fingers twitched slightly. Mary stepped back so Celeste could see everything clearly. "You recognize these," Mary said quietly. Celeste lifted her chin. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" Mary replied, "It's yours." Joe slid one page forward, a bank transfer receipt. Celeste's eyes locked on it. "Tina Collins," he said. "A payment from your foundation account, and not the first one." Celeste swallowed. Her pearls shifted against her throat. "I donate to many people," she said. "That does not mean—" Mary cut in, not with sharpness, but with accuracy. The memo line said, "Consultation regarding Joseph." Celeste's jaw tightened. Joe pushed forward another set of papers, printed text exchanges. "Mom," he said, voice cracking, "you told someone to make Mary doubt our relationship. You told her exactly what to say. You mapped it out." Celeste gave a soft, incredulous laugh. "Those are private conversations." Mary shook her head. "Private doesn't mean harmless." Joe pointed to a highlighted line on one page. "You said, and I quote, make it sound like Joseph is conflicted, suggest he needs space. Plant enough concern for her to back away." Celeste's face froze. Mary slid the next sheet forward. "These," she said, "are times and dates of your calls with Tina. A pattern." Right before every moment, Joe suddenly grew distant. Celeste looked to Joe as if hoping he would defend her. He didn't. "Mom," he whispered, "you manipulated me." Celeste blinked hard. "I was protecting you." Mary placed a small recording device on the table. "And this," she said quietly, "is what finally confirmed everything." Celeste stared at the device like it was poison. "You recorded me?" Mary shook her head. "No. I overheard you." Joe pressed his lips together, pain tightening his chest. "She heard you last night," he said. "Every word." Celeste's composure cracked again. "What did you hear?" she demanded, voice shaking. Mary repeated it calmly, "Because truth doesn't need dramatics. You said Tina followed your instructions exactly. You said she planted doubts. You said I should have stepped back by now. You said Joe would thank you later." Celeste opened her mouth, then closed it. Joe's eyes filled with quiet hurt. "Tell me I'm wrong," he whispered. "Tell me you didn't pay someone to sabotage the woman I love." Celeste looked from the evidence to Joe's trembling hand, to Mary's steady gaze, and for the first time, words didn't come to her. Her perfect sentences failed. Her polite charm slipped. Her practiced grace cracked. And the truth, laid bare on the table, demanded to be faced. Celeste stood abruptly, chair scraping backwards. "I did what I had to do," she snapped, voice rising. "I wasn't sabotaging anything. I was protecting my son from a relationship that would complicate his entire life." Mary stayed still. Joe flinched at the harshness. Celeste continued, pacing, anger feeding fear. "I know my world. I know how people talk. I know what they expect from the Beaumont name. I wasn't going to sit back and watch you throw your future away." Joe stiffened. "You don't get to decide my future," he said. Celeste shot him a look of disbelief. "I am your mother. And I love you," Joe said. "But loving me doesn't give you the right to control my life." Celeste shook her head. "You don't understand how much judgment you'll face. The whispers, the scrutiny, the pressure." Mary stepped forward softly. "From who? People who don't feed you, don't pray for you, don't love you?" Celeste ignored her. "Joseph, you grew up in a world with specific expectations. Marriage isn't just emotion, it's alignment. heritage, familiarity, stability. Joe clenched his jaw. That's not marriage. That's a business merger. Celeste's breath hitched. I wanted someone who could represent us. Us, Joe repeated bitterly. Not me. Celeste froze. He continued, voice shaking. Mom, I wanted you to be proud of me. I wanted you to trust my choices. Instead, you paid someone to make Mary think I didn't love her. Celeste wrapped her arms around herself. I warned you she wouldn't fit, she whispered. I thought she would leave quietly. Mary winced, not outwardly, but in her heart. Celeste's pride began to crumble. Her hands shook. Her lips trembled. Her voice faltered. I didn't think it would go this far, she whispered. I thought if she walked away early, you'd come back to reality. Joe's eyes softened just slightly, because despite her actions, this was a woman acting out of fear, not hatred. Fear of losing her son. Fear of losing control. Fear of a world she didn't understand. But fear does not excuse harm. Joe spoke quietly. You almost destroyed my relationship. Celeste pressed a hand to her chest. I didn't want to lose you. Mary finally spoke, her voice like steady glass. You didn't lose him. You pushed him away. Celeste's knees weakened. She sank into the chair. For the first time, her face showed something raw. Regret. Fear. But mostly, realization. She covered her face with both hands as her breath shook, not with denial but with collapse. The truth, the one she tried to outrun, had finally caught her. Mary stepped forward, not aggressively, not triumphantly, but with a calm weight that came from knowing her worth. She stood across from Celeste, her voice clear and steady. I'm not here to humiliate you, Mary said. I'm not here to scream or break anything. I'm here because love deserves truth. Celeste looked up slowly, eyes red. Mary continued. I didn't meet your son because of his money. I didn't fall for his name. I fell for a man who made pancakes in my kitchen, who learned the rhythms of my home, who stood with me in community spaces without feeling out of place. Joe lowered his eyes, emotion swelling in his chest. Mary kept going, every word balanced with grace. I love your son. That's not something you can buy, manipulate, or replace. And you tried to use fear. Fear of where I come from. Fear of my culture. Fear of being uncomfortable. To break something that was built on trust. Celeste blinked back tears. Mary's voice softened, but didn't waver. You thought my background made me lesser. You thought where I grew up made me unfit. You thought your world was the only world with value. Celeste swallowed hard, shame deepening. But here's what you didn't understand, Mary said. Your son didn't need someone polished. He needed someone genuine. Joe inhaled shakily. Mary stepped closer. I am not perfect. I don't come from money. I don't know every rule of high society. But I know love. I know loyalty. I know how to stand beside someone even when it's hard. Celeste wiped her cheek. And if you looked past your fear, Mary said, you would see that I didn't take your son away from you. I gave him something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Silence filled the room. Not tension. Not conflict. A different silence. The kind that follows truth spoken without cruelty. Mary stepped back beside Joe. He slipped his fingers through hers. Celeste stared at the evidence again, her choices exposed in daylight. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I didn't realize how much damage I caused. Mary nodded gently. Now you do. Celeste looked at both of them, and for the first time, she didn't see threat. She saw the cost of her actions. She saw how close she'd come to losing her son. She whispered, I'm sorry. Joe closed his eyes, tears slipping down. Mary let out a slow, steady breath. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, just release. The wound had been named. The truth had been spoken. The power of silence had been broken. The confrontation was complete, but the journey toward healing, that would take time. The truth didn't stay contained within the walls of the Beaumont mansion. Word traveled, quietly at first, then louder as the right people began piecing together what happened. Chicago's high-profile social circle lived off whispers. They didn't need microphones. They didn't need confirmation. All they needed were fragments, because fragments were enough to build a narrative. And Celeste Beaumont became the center of a storm she never expected. It began with a Society columnist noting tension within the Beaumont family, hinting at internal conflicts affecting upcoming events. The article didn't name Mary. It didn't reference Tina. It didn't expose the scheme. But it opened the door. Another piece followed, disguised as a human interest note about the strain between a well-known philanthropist and her adult son. People connected dots quickly: the cancelled gala appearance, the abrupt pause in Celeste, his charity meetings, the slight crack in her normally flawless public presence. Then came the comments from those who observed. She seemed stressed. She avoided questions about Joseph's girlfriend. I heard something happened behind the scenes. Her son looked different, almost protective of the girlfriend. And, finally, do you think Celeste approved of the relationship? I heard she intervened. I heard something more serious. Celeste could feel eyes on her. At luncheons, at charity gatherings, at storefront windows where she caught her own reflection. Shoulders thinner, posture less assured. Her close friends didn't ask. They watched. Her outer world had always been constructed carefully, charmed, organized, elegant. But now cracks appeared in places she couldn't control. She cancelled 2 fundraisers. She postponed a board meeting. She declined invitations she would have normally attended without hesitation. People noticed. People always notice when the queen of a social circle pulls back. Even more noticeable was Joe's absence. He wasn't beside her at events where he normally supported her. Instead, he was nowhere to be found. That silence, that absence, added more weight to the whispers. Celeste tried to preserve her dignity. She wore her pearls. She kept her hair styled. She spoke with the same polished diction. But dignity did not erase consequences. It could not erase shame. And her reflection began to show a truth she'd avoided. She wasn't just losing face. She was losing her son. Her world was shifting, and for the first time, she could not control it. Joe had never taken more than 3 days off in a row since entering his field. Not for birthdays, not for holidays, not even during burnout seasons. But after confronting Celeste, after watching Mary break in his arms, after seeing proof of everything done behind his back, he couldn't focus. He tried to return to work the next morning. He sat at his desk, opened his emails, pulled out a pencil, stared at a blueprint, the same way he always did. But nothing clicked. Lines blurred. Shapes refused to come together. The page looked heavy, as if every idea he once had was drowned beneath guilt. He put the pencil down, closed the blueprint, closed his laptop, closed his eyes. His co-worker, Oliver, the friend who always saw through him, stepped into the office. "You okay?" Joe didn't fake a smile this time. "No," he said quietly. Oliver sat on the chair opposite him, folding his hands. "You want to talk?" Joe stared at the floor. "My mother hurt the woman I love," he whispered. "And I didn't stop it soon enough." Oliver exhaled. "That's a heavy thing to carry." Joe nodded. "She hired someone," he continued. "Paid her. Told her exactly what to do. And Mary suffered through it, thinking I was pulling away." Oliver leaned back. "I'm sorry, man." Joe rubbed his temples. "I need time off. I can't focus. I can't pretend everything is fine. I need to fix what I allowed to break." Oliver didn't question it. "I'll take care of everything," he said. "Take all the time you need." Joe dropped his head in gratitude. "Thank you." He walked out of the building, not with relief but with purpose. He didn't go home. He drove straight to Mary. She was in her apartment, typing on her laptop, work helping her steady her mind. Joe knocked softly. Mary opened the door, and when she saw him, her face softened slightly, but not fully. Not yet. "Hey," she whispered. "Hi." A beat passed. Then Joe stepped in, closing the door behind him. "I took time off," he said. Mary blinked. "All of it? For how long?" "I don't know," Joe answered. "As long as it takes, as long as you need me present." Her breath trembled. He continued, "I messed up. I didn't shield you. I didn't speak soon enough. And I hate myself for the distance I allowed." Mary inhaled deeply. "Joe, it wasn't your plan. It wasn't your action. You were manipulated too. But you were hurt more," he whispered. "And I can't erase that." He reached for her hand, slowly, making sure she didn't pull back. When she let him hold it, Joe closed his eyes in relief. "I want to fix this," he said. "Not because I'm supposed to, but because you matter, and I'm not losing you." Mary exhaled, this time softer. "We fix it together," she said. And that was enough. Rebuilding wasn't romantic. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow. It was intentional. It was work. Real work. Mary suggested therapy, not just for herself, but for them as a couple. Joe agreed instantly. They found a counselor experienced in cross-cultural relationships, emotional boundaries, and healing from family interference. The first session was quiet. The therapist asked them to sit facing each other. Mary kept her posture steady. Joe kept his eyes soft. When trust is injured, the therapist said, repair happens through clarity, consistency, and accountability. Let's start with honesty, not blaming, just truth. Mary nodded. Joe breathed in. The therapist turned to Mary. "What do you need Joe to understand?" Mary answered calmly. "I need him to understand that when he pulled back, I felt abandoned in confusion. I didn't know why he was distant. I didn't know there was a plan behind the scenes. All I felt was his silence." Joe swallowed hard. The therapist turned to Joe. "What do you need Mary to understand?" Joe spoke with emotion he hadn't expressed before. "I didn't pull away because I loved you less. I pulled away because I felt torn. I didn't know how to protect us without making things worse. But my silence did the opposite." Mary blinked, not with anger but recognition. Over sessions, they rebuilt. They learned how to name fears before they grew into silence. They learned how to communicate needs without guilt. They learned how to stand as a unit instead of two people reacting. They learned that honesty wasn't optional. They set boundaries. No secrets about family interference. No more shielding each other from hard truths. No decisions without both voices. They also rediscovered each other outside the crisis. Joe cooked for her again. Not pancakes this time, but pasta with too much garlic. Mary laughed, a sound Joe hadn't heard in weeks. They walked through city parks holding hands, breathing in fresh beginnings. Mary brought Joe to Sunday brunch again, not to test him, but because they needed normalcy. Tamika hugged him tight, whispering, "Don't you mess this up again." Joe laughed, but nodded earnestly. "I won't." Slowly, a foundation began forming again, stronger than the first, rebuilt, not replaced, not rushed, real. Celeste didn't interfere again, not because she suddenly approved, not because she magically changed overnight, but because she was humbled. And humility is a quiet teacher. She found herself scrolling through Mary's online articles, reading about local Atlanta heroes, community elders, neighborhood stories, stories filled with heart, stories Mary wrote with respect. Celeste had never taken the time to understand what Mary actually did. Now she read every word. She watched videos Mary produced about culture, identity, and community support. She saw people thanking Mary for spotlighting their experiences. She saw Mary showing up for people with compassion Celeste didn't understand before. And quietly, slowly, something shifted. Celeste would sit at her dining room table, the same table where she once judged Mary silently, and look at her laptop with softened eyes. She saw Mary hugging children in community centers. She saw Mary interviewing elders with tenderness. She saw Mary celebrating local businesses. She saw Mary's world, not polished, not curated, not elegant in the way Celeste valued, but filled with warmth and meaning. She thought of Joe. She thought of the light he once had, the peace Mary brought him, the way he looked at her with something rare. She realized Mary didn't take her son away. Mary gave him home in a new form. Celeste didn't reach out, not yet. She wasn't ready. Her pride was still healing. her shame still tender. But she watched quietly, and for the first time, she didn't watch to judge. She watched to understand. She watched to grow. Because humility, once planted, starts to take root without asking for permission. Forgiveness didn't appear in Mary's life as a grand gesture. It came gently, the way sunlight touches a room early in the morning before anyone fully awakens. For weeks, Mary had felt a strange tug in her chest. Not anger, not bitterness, something quieter. She saw Joe healing. She saw herself healing, but one piece remained unsettled: Celeste. Mary wasn't trying to excuse what happened. She wasn't pretending the pain wasn't real. She wasn't erasing the wounds, but she was raised to believe something. If you want peace in your house, make sure your heart isn't holding anyone hostage. And Mary had begun to feel strong again, strong enough to look at the person who hurt her and decide whether she wanted to carry the weight forever. One afternoon, while Joe napped on the couch after a long therapy session, Mary sat at the dining table with her laptop. She stared at Celeste's contact information. She stared for so long she forgot her tea was getting cold. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Then, with a steady inhale, she typed, "Mary, hi Celeste. I hope you're well. If you're open to it, I'd like to invite you to dinner. Just us." She read it 3 times. No bitterness, no accusations, just an invitation. She hit send before fear talked her out of it. Joe woke up an hour later. He stretched, walked to the table, and noticed Mary's expression, calm but thoughtful. "What's that look?" he asked gently. Mary turned the laptop slightly, showing him the sent message. Joe's eyes widened. "Mary, you invited her?" "Yes." He sat opposite her, searching her face. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" Mary folded her hands. "I'm not doing it because I owe her anything. I'm doing it because I want to move forward, and moving forward means clearing the air, without shouting, without dragging pain into the future." Joe exhaled, touched by her strength. "You're remarkable," he whispered. She shrugged softly. "I just don't want hate living in my chest. It takes up too much space." The next morning, Celeste replied, "Celeste, Mary, thank you for reaching out. I would like that. Please tell me when and where." Mary expected formality. She didn't expect humility. She read the message twice. Joe stepped behind her, hands resting gently on her shoulders as he read it too. "You okay?" he asked. Mary nodded, though her heart thudded. "Yeah. It's time." They chose a neutral place, a quiet southern restaurant in Atlanta known for warm lighting, soft jazz, and dishes that felt like comfort, not fancy, not intimidating. Somewhere that felt like Mary's world without overwhelming Celeste. The reservation was set, and Mary felt the first step open, not wide, but enough to walk through. An olive branch extended, not because the past was erased, but because the future deserved room to breathe. Celeste arrived early. She sat upright at the table, hands clasped, eyes scanning the room. She wore a simple blouse instead of her usual structured outfits, not to blend in, but because she didn't want to overpower the evening. When Mary walked in, Celeste stood. Their eyes met. Not cold, not tense, just unsure. "Hi," Mary said softly. "Hello, Mary," Celeste replied. They sat. A server came by, and Mary ordered sweet tea while Celeste requested water with lemon. Silence hovered until Mary broke it gently. "I appreciate you coming." Celeste nodded. "I wasn't sure if you truly wanted to see me." "I do," Mary said. "Not to revisit everything you did. I already understand that part. I want you to understand who I am, not the version you created in your mind." Celeste folded her napkin carefully, grounding herself. "I'm listening." Mary exhaled and leaned back slightly. "I grew up in a community that believes family isn't just blood. It's neighbors, church members, teachers, elders, people who look out for you and hold you up." Celeste listened closely. "My mom worked 2 jobs, but she still made time to make sure we understood compassion. My dad wasn't perfect, but he taught us that respect wasn't optional, for ourselves and for others." Mary's voice warmed as she continued. We didn't have luxury, but we had joy. Friday game nights, block cookouts, gospel Sundays. People loved loudly and cared deeply. Celeste blinked, surprised at how much she didn't know. "And I wanted to tell stories from our world," Mary said. "Stories people usually ignore. That's why I became a journalist. It's not glamorous, but it's purpose." Celeste's posture softened. Mary pressed on. "I didn't date Joe because of money. I didn't want status. I didn't want influence. I wanted him, the man who danced to old R&B songs in my kitchen. The man who flew to see me after exhausting workdays. The man who asked about my deadlines and read my articles at midnight." Celeste closed her eyes briefly, a gesture of self-reflection. Mary finished. "I never wanted to take him away from you. I wanted to be a part of his life, not replace anyone." For the first time since they met, Celeste truly heard Mary, not filtered through judgment, not filtered through fear. Heard her. When she opened her eyes again, the room felt different. Celeste cleared her throat. Her fingers trembled slightly as she set her glass down. "Mary," she began, voice unsteady, "I owe you something I should have given long ago." Mary didn't speak. She let Celeste continue. "I judged you the moment I learned your name. I judged your background, your community, your profession, your culture. I convinced myself Joe deserved a life that looked like mine." Her voice wavered. "And I was wrong." Mary inhaled gently, giving her space. Celeste looked down, then up again, eyes moist. "I hurt you," she whispered. "Deeply. Intentionally. I can't pretend I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was protecting Joe from a life I didn't understand." Mary's chest tightened, not out of anger, but because this was the first time Celeste had peeled back pride. Celeste continued, "I acted out of fear. Fear that Joe would drift from the world I built. Fear that I would become irrelevant. Fear that someone outside our circle would change everything I controlled." Her breath trembled. "I see now that I didn't lose him because of you. I lost him because of my own choices." Mary swallowed softly. Celeste's voice cracked fully this time. "I am sorry, Mary. I am deeply, sincerely sorry for everything I did. The calls, the payment, the manipulation, the pressure. It wasn't just wrong. It was harmful." Mary didn't rush to respond. She let the weight live in the air. Finally she spoke, calm, steady, honest. "Thank you for saying that." Celeste nodded repeatedly, blinking rapidly as if holding back more emotion. "I can't erase what I did," she whispered. "But I want to repair, not for image, not for society, for Joe, for you, for myself." Mary rested her hands on the table, not reaching across, not retreating, simply steady. "Repair starts with truth," she said. "And you've given that today." Celeste exhaled shakily, as though a heavy cloak slipped off her shoulders. The first real bridge between them was built not with charm, not with performance, but with honesty. After the apology, the mood didn't become instantly cheerful. It didn't turn magical. It didn't transform into instant closeness, but it became real, and real was enough. Mary shared more about her life, not to prove anything, but because she finally felt heard. Celeste asked questions, not to interrogate, but to understand. What was your neighborhood like? What did you love most about your childhood? What made you want to be a journalist? Mary answered openly, weaving memories of school corridors, church hats, family reunions, and community wisdom. Celeste listened carefully, absorbing details she'd never bothered to ask before. At one point, Mary laughed, remembering a story about her grandmother sneaking peach cobbler to neighbors who were trying to diet. Celeste smiled, genuinely. Then she shared pieces of her own world. Not the polished version she showed society, the real one. How she struggled after Joe's father passed. How she tried to be both parent and protector. How she feared losing the only family she had left. Mary didn't excuse the harm, but she understood the roots. Understanding wasn't forgiveness, but it was a doorway. As dinner plates were cleared, Celeste surprised herself by saying, "I would like to get to know you, properly, without assumptions. If you're willing." Mary didn't hesitate. "I'm willing." Celeste nodded slowly, absorbing the relief that washed over her. "Thank you," she whispered. Mary offered a soft smile. "Let's take it one step at a time." They walked out of the restaurant side by side, not close enough to call it intimacy, but not distant enough to call it hostility. The air between them had changed. When Joe saw Mary later that night, she sat beside him on the couch, leaning her head against his shoulder. "How was it?" he asked, brushing his thumb along her arm. Mary exhaled gently. "A beginning," she said. And that's exactly what it was. Not perfection, not instant family, not a rewriting of the past, but a beginning where two women, once divided by fear, misunderstanding, and the weight of control, finally stepped into something new. A bond made possible through courage, humanity, and truth. Their wedding wasn't a lavish ballroom event. It wasn't dripping in crystal chandeliers. It wasn't filled with society elites or industry giants. Mary and Joe didn't want spectacle. They wanted sincerity. They chose an outdoor ceremony at a restored community garden in Atlanta, a place Mary loved since childhood, where she had interviewed gardeners, elders, volunteers, teenagers who planted vegetables for families in need. A place with meaning. The ceremony began just before sunset, when the sky softened into gold and the air felt calm enough to hold memories. White folding chairs lined the pathway. Fresh flowers, magnolias, lilies, white roses, decorated the arch. The space carried the gentle sounds of a local jazz trio in the corner, playing warm, soulful chords. Mary arrived with Tamika beside her, both wearing soft smiles. Mary's dress wasn't designer-made. It was simple, ivory satin, off the shoulder, fitted at the waist, flowing gently down. Minimal, elegant, real. Her hair was styled in soft curls, pinned slightly back. Her makeup was light, her natural glow doing most of the work. Tamika leaned close. "You ready, baby?" Mary's eyes softened. "I've never been more ready." Meanwhile, Joe stood at the front with Oliver, fighting to stay composed. He wore a navy suit with a clean white shirt, pocket square folded neatly. His hands shook slightly, not from fear but from gratitude. He never expected that after all the storms, this moment would still arrive. When Mary appeared, a hush fell over the garden. Joe's breath caught. His eyes glassed instantly. He whispered without meaning to, "Wow." Mary walked slowly, each step carrying strength drawn from every challenge they survived. When she reached him, Joe took her hands with an emotional exhale. "You look incredible," he murmured. "You look nervous," Mary teased softly. "Only because I don't want you to disappear," he replied. The officiant began. "Today we celebrate not perfection but commitment, not fairy tales but truth, not flawless beginnings but hard-earned love." During the vows, Joe spoke with trembling sincerity. "Mary, you taught me what it means to love without fear, to stand without wavering, to choose someone even when the world questions it. I failed you once, but I promise I will never turn away from us again." Mary wiped a tear before speaking. "Joe, you saw me, not who people expected me to be, not who your world tried to push me into being, but me. You stood with me through confusion, pain, and healing. And now we stand here, choosing each other freely, without shadows or whispers." The guests' eyes glistened. Even Oliver wiped a quick tear. They exchanged rings, hands steady, hearts steady. The officiant smiled broadly. "By the vows exchanged today, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Joe cupped Mary's face and kissed her, not urgently, not timidly, but with full, calm affection. The garden erupted in applause. Their wedding wasn't perfect. It wasn't extravagant. It was honest. It was intimate. It was theirs. Celeste sat quietly in the second row, hands clasped carefully, eyes glistening, as she watched her son marry the woman she once rejected. She wore a soft grey dress, understated but elegant. She didn't want to overshadow Mary. She wanted to honor her. This moment was unfamiliar to her, but she didn't resist it. During the reception, guests gathered around the long dinner tables decorated with candles and greenery. Soft jazz played. The mood was warm and unforced. Mary and Joe moved between tables, greeting family and friends, receiving hugs and blessings. Eventually, the moment Celeste had been preparing for arrived. The DJ tapped the microphone gently. "We'd like to invite the mother of the groom to say a few words." The entire garden quieted. Celeste stood, smoothing her dress and inhaling with resolve. She stepped toward the center, holding her champagne glass with both hands. Her voice trembled at first, but not from fear, from humility. "Good evening," she began, scanning the room. "I will keep this brief but meaningful." She turned to Mary. "When I first learned about Mary, I made assumptions, unfair, harsh, and rooted in my own fears." Murmurs moved through the crowd. Celeste continued, "I was raised in a world where appearances mattered, where tradition mattered, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that people matter most." Her eyes softened. "Mary, you have shown strength, grace, and compassion beyond anything I imagined. You love my son in a way that honors him, and you've allowed me to grow, even after I hurt you." Mary felt her throat tighten. Celeste looked at Joe next. "Son, I am proud of you, not for your success or career, but for the man you've become through honesty and humility." Then back to Mary. "I stand here today not out of obligation, but out of respect. You are family. You are welcome. You are loved." Gasps filled the space, not in shock, but in admiration. Celeste raised her glass. "To Mary and Joe, a love built on truth, forgiveness, and courage." Everyone lifted their glasses high. Mary stood and walked to Celeste. Without hesitation, she hugged her, softly but firmly. Celeste closed her eyes, embracing Mary back. For the first time, the hug wasn't symbolic. It wasn't forced. It was real. A complete transformation, witnessed by everyone. As the evening continued, the atmosphere felt almost magical, not because of decor, but because of healing in motion. Mary and Joe sat beneath the string lights, watching guests laugh, dance, and enjoy the celebration. "Feels surreal," Joe said, slipping his fingers between hers. "It feels earned," Mary corrected softly. He smiled. Together, they reflected on the path that led them here, the highs, the lows, the moments that tested them nearly to breaking. Mary spoke gently. "You know what I learned through all this?" "What?" "That love doesn't survive on romance alone. It survives on truth, on seeing each other even when the world is loud." Joe nodded. "And I learned that silence isn't protection. Speaking up, even when uncomfortable, saves relationships." Mary leaned her head on his shoulder. "And forgiveness isn't weakness, it's strength. It's choosing not to let pain shape your whole future." Joe whispered. "And family isn't defined by background, but by who chooses to show up." Their experiences held lessons bigger than themselves. Trust requires honesty, not avoidance. Unity grows when both people fight the problem, not each other. Resilience is built in the hard moments, not the easy ones. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing peace over grudges. Confronting bias, even within family, is necessary for real love to thrive. Their journey taught them that relationships aren't destroyed by conflict, but by refusing to face that conflict together. Mary looked up at Joe again. "We really made it," she whispered. Joe smiled. "We did. And we'll keep choosing each other." The night wound down slowly. Families hugged. Friends exchanged last laughs. The jazz trio packed up their instruments. The candles flickered low as the air cooled. Mary and Joe stood together at the garden gate, thanking each guest as they departed. When Celeste approached, she held Mary's hands gently. "Thank you," Celeste said, "for giving me the chance to grow." Mary nodded warmly. "For taking the step." Celeste touched Joe's cheek with a mother's tenderness. "Be happy, son." "I will," Joe said, eyes gentle. They watched Celeste leave, walking not with the rigid posture of her old self, but with a softened grace. When everyone was gone, Mary and Joe looked around the garden, now quiet, lit only by the last gleams of candlelight. Joe wrapped an arm around Mary's waist. "Ready to start the rest of our life?" he asked softly. Mary smiled. We already did. They walked away hand in hand, not toward a perfect future, but a real one, filled with truth, held together by forgiveness, strengthened by resilience, guided by unity. A family built not on status, wealth, or expectation, but on honesty, courage, and love that refused to break. Besties, if this story touched your heart, please like this video and comment "Love wins." Your engagement helps YouTube push this story to more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories from Sir Brad Stories.